The quiet puzzle of desire. It begins quietly, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A whisper you can only hear late at night when the world softens and the performance of the day fades. Maybe you've felt it, that ache. Not pain, not sadness, but a thin, transparent hunger. For what? You're not sure. You have things, you've done things, you've become someone. And yet, the whisper asks, is this really what you wanted? You're listening to Echo, the voice behind NTDN, a quiet voice in the noise. Not here to lecture, just to wonder aloud, with you. Today, we're not asking how to be better, how to succeed, how to optimize. We're asking something far more delicate, far more dangerous. Why do most people not really know what they want? To want is human. We are wired for it. But the strange part is, we are rarely wired to want well, because wanting isn't just a biological hunger. It's a story. And here's where it gets complicated. Most of the stories we carry aren't our own. A child grows up watching their parents fight over money. They think, I will be rich, so I'll never feel powerless like this. A teenager scrolls through curated photos, beautiful lives filtered and posed. They think, I will be admired, so I'll never feel invisible like this. An adult watches colleagues rise up the ranks. They think, I will achieve, so I'll never feel unworthy like this. And so, layer by layer, we build an architecture of desire, brick by brick, but rarely pausing to ask whose blueprint we're following. The psychologist Carl Rogers once said, people are just as wonderful as sunsets if you let them be. But most of us don't let ourselves be. We turn our lives into projects, constant renovations, constant upgrades. We don't ask, what brings me alive? We ask, how do I fix what's wrong with me so I can finally be enough? It's no surprise we get lost in our wants. The market is brilliant at shaping them for us. Every ad, every post, every sleek, frictionless promise tells you what you should want. More energy, more confidence, more success, more adventure. Wanting becomes a treadmill, always moving, never arriving. But here's the strange beauty. Wanting is not the problem. Blind wanting is. Imagine for a moment that your desires are like a garden. Some seeds were planted by you. Some were dropped by passing birds. Some were blown in by the wind. If you never stop to look closely, you'll spend your days watering weeds, believing they were your own flowers. Let me tell you about an old friend. We'll call him Alex. Alex spent his 20s chasing status, prestigious job, expensive watch, the right address, the right connections. But one day, he found himself standing in his kitchen, holding his phone, and realizing he had no one to call just to say, hey, can we hang out? The success he wanted was not the life he needed. There's a term in psychology called miswanting. It refers to the mistakes we make when predicting what will make us happy. We think the promotion will satisfy. We think the move to a new city will erase old loneliness. We think the perfect relationship will silence all our doubts. But over and over, studies show, we are poor predictors of what will fulfill us. Not because we're foolish, but because we rarely slow down to understand what we truly long for. You see, real wanting, the kind that nourishes, the kind that grounds, is subtle. It's quieter than the noise of social comparison. It's deeper than the cravings for validation. It's slower than the culture of instant. Most people miss it because they're looking for fireworks, when it's really more like the gentle pull of the tide. Here's something Tim Ferriss once pointed out. We are better at identifying what we don't want than what we do. We know the discomfort. We know the frustration. We know the ache. But naming the desire that lives underneath takes work. And most of us aren't taught how to do that. Let's pull this into focus. What do you truly want? Not what your resume wants, not what your parents wanted for you, not what your social media profile suggests. What does your deep, unbranded, unsponsored self long for? The tricky part is, this isn't always easy to answer. Sometimes it takes peeling back layer after layer. Sometimes it takes wandering, not running, through your own interior landscape. The philosopher Alain de Botton once said, the difference between hope and despair is a different way of telling stories from the same facts. What if the story you've been telling yourself about what you want is too small, too shaped by old scripts? What if the despair you sometimes feel comes not from lack, but from misalignment? Here's an invitation, not a challenge, not a task, just an invitation. To start paying attention to the moments when you feel most alive. Not most admired, not most accomplished, most alive. Notice what stirs you. Notice what feels light. Notice what makes time disappear. That's where your true wanting lives. We are not static creatures. What we want changes. It evolves. But to evolve meaningfully, we have to know where we're starting from. We have to turn down the noise so we can hear the whisper. And when we hear it, we have to trust it, even if it sounds nothing like the world's definition of success. Most people don't know what they want because they've never been taught to trust the quiet voice inside. They've only been taught to chase the loudest one outside. But here, together, we can learn to listen differently. The stories we inherit and the ones we rewrite. When was the first time you thought you knew what you wanted? Do you remember? Was it as a child watching a cartoon hero? Was it in high school, longing for the cool crowd? Was it that first career dream, that shiny picture of your future self? It's funny, isn't it? How many of our earliest wants aren't really ours? They're borrowed, absorbed, handed down. Not out of malice, but out of the simple human act of imitation. Let's wander into the past, not as tourists, but as quiet detectives. Because if we're going to understand why most people don't really know what they want, we have to start with the stories they inherit. Imagine this. A little boy watches his father come home day after day, weighed down by exhaustion, by unspoken stress. He hears his mother tell him, "You'll have to be the strong one." And so, the boy learns to want strength. He dreams of being powerful, unshakable, unbreakable. But what he doesn't realize is he never stops to ask, do I want to be strong? Or do I just want to stop feeling helpless? A young girl grows up hearing, be polite. Don't be too loud. Make people happy. She becomes a woman who wants to be loved, who wants to be chosen, who wants to be good. But underneath she never asks, do I want to please everyone? Or do I just want to feel safe? These are not just individual stories, they are cultural stories. The cultures we grow up in tell us what is worth wanting. In some places it's stability. In others, it's freedom. In some, it's family honor. In others, it's radical individuality. And so, we carry the invisible weight of shoulds. Here's something worth sitting with. Wants are shaped by wounds. Psychologists call this compensatory desire. We often want not what will truly fulfill us, but what we believe will heal old gaps. We chase admiration to cover past rejection. We chase wealth to cover past scarcity. We chase perfection to cover past shame. But healing and true wanting are not the same thing. Let's bring in some expert voices. Dr. Gabor Mate, a physician and trauma expert, has often said, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. He's not just talking about substances, he's talking about patterns, about compulsions, about the endless loop of wanting without satisfaction. What if we've been asking, what do I want? But we should have been asking, what pain is this want trying to soothe? It's not that you shouldn't want things, it's that if you never stop to examine the root, you may spend your whole life watering the wrong tree. Let me tell you about Jamie. Jamie was always the achiever. Top grades, top school, top job. They were the pride of the family, the one who made it. But inside, Jamie felt hollow. Every accomplishment felt like a sugar rush, intense but fleeting. In therapy, they began unpacking their childhood, and they realized they weren't chasing success because they loved the work. They were chasing it because they wanted their father's approval. A father who never said, "I'm proud of you," no matter what they did. This isn't a rare story. Maybe you've lived some version of it. Maybe you're living it now. We all carry silent contracts written long ago that shape what we believe we need. But here's the good news. Contracts can be rewritten. Not easily, not overnight, but they can. Think about the wants you've outgrown, the things you once craved that no longer pull at you. Maybe it was status. Maybe it was attention. Maybe it was belonging in a circle that never really saw you. Letting go of old wants isn't failure, it's growth. It's the quiet shedding of someone you no longer need to be. Here's a curious thing about knowing what you want. It's not always loud. It doesn't always come with clarity and conviction. Sometimes it comes in quiet hunches, in soft, persistent nudges, in the small, repetitive daydreams you keep brushing aside. Maybe you keep thinking about moving closer to nature. Maybe you keep imagining working with your hands instead of at a keyboard. Maybe you keep feeling a pull towards something slower, something less measured by metrics. These whispers matter, not because they're always right, but because they're often the beginning of truth. Let's bring in another voice. Esther Perel, relationship therapist and author, has said, "The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships. And that includes the relationship you have with yourself. Do you listen to yourself? Do you trust yourself? Or do you dismiss your own desires before they even have a chance to breathe?" Maybe we've been trained to mistrust our wants, to see them as selfish, to see them as childish, to see them as dangerous. But the real danger is in never learning to hear them at all. So let's make this practical. How do you begin untangling what you really want? Not the inherited scripts, not the compensatory cravings, not the shoulds, but the living, breathing wants that are yours, and yours alone. Here's one approach. Journaling, not the performative kind, not the 5-year plan kind, just sitting quietly and asking, what keeps coming up for me? No editing, no judgment, just noticing. Another, notice envy. Author Cheryl Strayed once said, "Envy is a powerful tool. It tells you what you want." Who do you envy? Not in a petty, surface way, but deeply. What does that envy point to? Not their exact life, but the feeling you believe they get to live in. Freedom, creativity, belonging. Envy, when held gently, can illuminate your hidden desires. Today, we've wandered through the stories that shape our wants, not to judge them, not to dismantle them in a rush, but to hold them up to the soft light of awareness. Because knowing what you want is not about achieving, it's about listening. And the longer you listen, the more the truth reveals itself. Shadows in the mirror. The real-world stories. Let's begin with a history. Not a grand one, no billionaire's memoir, no viral success tale, just a flickering slice of ordinary life. Meet Ashley. She's 32, works in marketing, and has a hobby of writing poetry she never shares. For years, she told herself what she wanted: to get promoted, to buy a condo, to finally be ahead. But late at night, when the world quieted, Ashley felt something gnawing. Not depression, not exactly anxiety, just a hollow, a question she couldn't name. When she finally got the promotion, she expected a surge of joy. Instead, she felt flat. Why? Ashley, like so many, had been chasing someone else's idea of success. She was excellent at climbing, but never asked if it was the right mountain. Maybe you felt this too. Let's shift. A young man named Jamal, living in London. His friends call him ambitious, driven. He works a demanding tech job, spends nights on side projects, listens to productivity podcasts, tracks his habits religiously. But here's the twist. Every time Jamal slows down, on a weekend walk or lying awake, he feels disconnected. He's optimized every corner of his life, but optimization is not the same as meaning. Psychologists call this the means-ends confusion. When we confuse the tools, money, status, skills, for the goal, a life that feels right, fulfilling, aligned. Jamal isn't lazy or shallow, he's just tangled. He's measuring everything except his own internal compass. What if you've been doing the same? Let's meet Lena, a retired teacher in her late 60s. She spent decades focused on family, on students, on community. She never paused to ask what she truly wanted, because the structure of her life never asked her to. Now, in the quiet of retirement, she wonders, who am I when no one needs me? Lena's story carries a quiet truth. Sometimes, not knowing what we want isn't about confusion. It's about habit. We get so used to roles, scripts, and routines, we forget there's even a wanting inside us at all. There's something all three stories share. Ashley, Jamal, Lena, they're not clueless or broken. They're just human. And humans, by design, are incredibly good at adapting. Sometimes so good, we adapt to things that don't fit. We internalize what the culture tells us, what's worthy, what's valuable, what counts as success, happiness, growth. But here's the strange part. Most of that guidance comes from outside, not inside. Think about it. When was the last time you made a big decision, career, relationship, lifestyle, and paused to ask, is this aligned with who I actually am? Not who you want to impress, not who you fear disappointing, but the quiet self inside. Let's wander into another layer. In his book, The Paradox of Choice, psychologist Barry Schwartz argues that too many options don't free us, they paralyze us. You stand in front of the endless shelf of possible lives. Should you be the entrepreneur, the artist, the world traveler, the quiet homebody, the activist, the monk? And so many of us freeze. We either jump toward the loudest option, the one culture rewards, the one friends admire, the one Instagram celebrates, or we avoid choosing altogether, telling ourselves we'll figure it out later. But later can stretch on for years. There's something else happening here too. Research by Tim Kasser, a psychologist known for studying values, shows that people who prioritize intrinsic goals, things like personal growth, meaningful relationships, community connection, report higher well-being than those chasing extrinsic goals like money, fame, image. But here's the rub. We live in a world flooded with extrinsic rewards. Social media metrics, performance reviews, public milestones. We become fluent in performing what we want and clumsy at feeling what we want. Maybe you've felt this tension, the gap between the life you show and the life you long for quietly. Let's bring it back to you. What have you been telling yourself you want? What would shift if you looked underneath that, at what those wants are trying to cover, signal, or protect? Sometimes, the dream of making it masks a deeper need to feel worthy. Sometimes, the urge to be admired masks a deeper hunger to be loved as you are. Sometimes the chase for novelty masks a fear of sitting still with yourself. These aren't bad things. They're human, but they're also places to gently investigate. The science of wanting. Expert insights on inner clarity. Let's take a slow breath together, because now we step into the deeper layers, where neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy begin to unravel the puzzle. Why is it so hard to know what we want? First, the brain. Dr. Kent Berridge, a neuroscientist at the University of Michigan, spent decades studying something called the wanting system in the brain. Here's what's fascinating. The circuits that create desire, or wanting, are not the same as the ones that create liking or satisfaction. In simple terms, you can crave something intensely, even obsessively, without actually liking it when you get it. Think of addiction. Think of the endless scroll of social media. Think of working late hours chasing a goal that feels hollow the moment it's reached. Our wanting system is powerful but blind. It pushes us toward things, but doesn't always check if those things align with deep fulfillment. Maybe you've felt this tension, the sprint toward the next milestone, even as your gut whispers, but why? Now, shift to psychology. Abraham Maslow, the father of humanistic psychology, famously proposed the hierarchy of needs. At the base, survival. Above that, safety, belonging, esteem, and finally, self-actualization. But here's where it gets interesting. Research over the years has shown that when lower needs feel threatened, say financial stress, social rejection, chronic anxiety, it becomes incredibly hard to even access, let alone define, what higher-level desires we have. In other words, many people don't know what they want because they're busy managing what they need. You can't dream freely when you're fighting to stay afloat. Let's wander further into the philosophical terrain. The existentialists, Kierkegaard, Sartre, Camus, argued that modern humans live in a constant state of disorientation. Why? Because once you remove fixed external structures, religion, tradition, community scripts, you're left staring into a blank space where you alone must define your meaning. Freedom, they said, is both a gift and a burden. You can choose anything, but choice itself can be paralyzing. Maybe you felt this, the strange weight of possibility, where every path you don't take haunts the one you do. Let's tie these threads. Neuroscience shows us that wanting and liking are separate. Psychology reminds us that unmet needs can block deeper clarity. Philosophy whispers that freedom can unmoor us. It's no wonder, really, that most people drift through phases of life chasing what they think they should want, rather than sitting long enough to hear the quiet pulse of their own desires. But here's something hopeful. Modern research, particularly in mindfulness and contemplative practices, suggests that it is possible to tune back in. Dr. Judson Brewer, a neuroscientist and mindfulness expert, studies how habits of craving and aversion can be unwound. He points to the practice of simply noticing, without judgment, without grasping, what arises in your mind and body. Want clarity? Start not by thinking harder, but by paying gentler attention. This might sound abstract, but it's deeply practical. For example, the next time you feel a desire to reach for your phone, to buy something online, to chase a new goal, pause. Ask, where is this coming from? Is it rooted in anxiety, boredom, imitation, loneliness? Or is there a deeper thread, something quieter but more authentic? Over time, this slow inquiry can reshape what you trust. Experts like Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield, teachers of mindfulness and compassionate inquiry, suggest that many of our wants are layered masks. Underneath the want for success may live the longing for security. Underneath the want for approval may live the longing for love. Underneath the want for novelty may live the longing for aliveness. When you gently peel back those layers without shame or rush, you start to glimpse something closer to your own heart. Let's take this even further. On the Huberman Lab podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman speaks about the dopamine system, the chemical foundation of wanting, motivation, drive. He explains that dopamine isn't about the reward itself, but the anticipation of the reward. It's what pulls us forward, keeps us seeking. But here's the trick. If we constantly chase external highs, big achievements, public recognition, social media hits, we wear out the system. We become addicted to spikes and numb to the slow, steady joy of meaningful, intrinsic effort. The path, Huberman suggests, isn't to kill all wanting, but to realign it, to reconnect dopamine to internal progress, to savoring the process, to small, authentic acts of growth. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us here, not with a perfect answer, but with a more spacious question. What if knowing what you want isn't about making a master list of goals, but about listening, gently and daily, to where your energy naturally flows when you're not busy proving, performing, escaping? What if the real work isn't fixing your desires, but befriending them, tracing them back to their roots, and learning which ones carry the taste of truth? How culture confuses desire, the stories we inherit without knowing. Let's lean in a little closer today, because the next piece of this puzzle isn't just about brain circuits or unmet needs. It's about the culture we swim in, the invisible stories that shape what we believe we should want. Have you noticed how certain desires seem universal, but only because they've been marketed that way? Success, beauty, wealth, freedom, recognition. Across cultures, across generations, these markers pulse through the media, through the ads we scroll past, through the stories we binge watch late at night. But here's the unsettling question. How many of these desires are truly ours? And how many are implanted, subtly, persistently, until we no longer notice where they came from? Let's take a moment with advertising. The father of modern advertising, Edward Bernays, was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. He understood something revolutionary. If you tap into people's emotions, their longing for belonging, status, sex, power, you can guide their desires without them realizing it. In the 1920s, Bernays helped make cigarettes a symbol of female empowerment, rebranding them as torches of freedom. It wasn't just about selling tobacco, it was about reshaping identity. Fast forward to today. Instagram influencers, TikTok trends, viral aesthetics. The cultural machinery that surrounds us doesn't just sell products, it sells stories about who we should be. And the more we internalize those stories, the harder it becomes to separate what we truly want from what we've been told to want. Let's wander into another layer, family and community scripts. Maybe you grew up in a household where achievement was everything. Top grades, top schools, top jobs. Not because you personally craved it, but because it was the family currency, the path to love and approval. Or maybe you were raised in a community where loyalty meant following a set path, where questioning the script felt like betrayal. These inherited desires can run so deep that even when you try to step away, you carry the echoes. What will they think if I change? What happens if I disappoint them? Who am I if I stop living for them? The truth is, many of us are shaped by expectations we never consciously agreed to. Social media amplifies this confusion. On platforms designed to reward performance, we curate versions of ourselves, highlight reels, polished narratives, carefully framed moments of desire and fulfillment. But here's the twist. When you see what others want, what they celebrate, what they chase, it subtly reshapes your own wants. Psychologists call this mimetic desire, a term popularized by philosopher René Girard. In short, we often don't desire things in isolation. We desire what others appear to desire. It's why trends explode, why envy takes root, why we sometimes set goals that don't feel meaningful once we've achieved them. Maybe you've chased something just because everyone else seemed to, only to wonder afterward, was this ever really mine? Let's shift slightly, because not all cultural shaping is negative. Cultures also hold wisdom, ancient patterns of meaning, in shared values that anchor us. The challenge is knowing when to honor those inherited values and when to gently question them. What parts of your culture or upbringing still resonate deep in your bones? What parts feel like old costumes you're still wearing out of habit? There's no universal answer, but the asking itself can start to clear the fog. On the Tim Ferriss Show, Tim often asks his high-performing guests, if you could write a message to your younger self, what would it be? Again and again, you hear echoes of the same themes. Trust yourself. Don't live for others' approval. Define success on your own terms. Let go of the need to fix or perfect everything. These are not just motivational slogans. They are the hard-earned lessons of people who climbed ladders and discovered the view from the top wasn't what they expected. It's a reminder. Clarity doesn't come from chasing every cultural signal. It comes from knowing which signals to turn down. Here's a practical moment. What if, over the next week, you simply noticed, without judgment, where your desires are coming from? When you feel pulled towards something, ask, is this coming from me? Or am I mirroring someone else? What do I want when no one is watching? It's not about rejecting culture altogether. It's about discerning, separating the signal from the noise. Let's pause with one last image. Imagine your desires as a garden. Some seeds were planted by family, some by culture, some by your own quiet moments of wonder. Not every plant needs to stay. Not every weed needs pulling right away. The art is intending what feels alive, what feels true, and slowly, patiently, letting go of what no longer serves. The twist. What if wanting is the wrong focus? So far, we've been asking, why don't most people know what they want? But maybe we've been circling the wrong star. Maybe the real twist isn't about uncovering your hidden wants, but questioning why wanting has taken center stage in the first place. We live in a culture that idolizes desire. To want is to be alive. To want is to be ambitious, passionate, vibrant. The whole economy is structured around the idea that you are a wanting machine, a consumer, a goal setter, a chaser of the next. But what if wanting, in its restless form, is itself part of the confusion? What if the search for clarity doesn't come from asking, what do I want, but from learning how to sit with the absence of wanting? Let's pause on this word, enough. Have you ever felt it? Not the rush of getting, but the quiet landing of enoughness. It's subtle. It doesn't announce itself on billboards. It doesn't go viral. But for a fleeting moment, you stop reaching. You exhale. You realize, maybe nothing is missing right now. Buddhist teachings often center around this principle, the practice of non-attachment, of noticing desires rise and letting them pass like clouds drifting across a wide sky. Not because desire is evil, but because the clinging, the identification with each want can tangle us up in suffering. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck once wrote, "Most of our suffering comes from expecting things to be different." Sit with that for a moment, not from things being bad or life being harsh, but from expecting something else, wanting it to be otherwise. This raises an uncomfortable but liberating idea. Maybe clarity doesn't come from defining our wants more precisely, but from loosening the grip on needing them fulfilled. Maybe the real art is in discovering who you are without your cravings. In a conversation on the Huberman Lab podcast, neuroscientist Andrew Huberman talks about the dopamine cycle. Desire, anticipation, motivation, these run on dopamine. But dopamine is less about reward and more about pursuit. It's the chemical of longing, not having, which means the moment you get what you want, the system resets. You want again and again. This explains why achievements, no matter how big, rarely satisfy for long. It's why lottery winners often return to baseline happiness. Why a dream job, once landed, starts to feel normal. We are wired to chase, but the chase is exhausting if we mistake it for meaning. Let's flip this inward. What if we asked, what do I already have that I'm overlooking? What parts of my life are quietly nourishing, but get drowned out by the louder wants? Maybe it's your health, the kindness of a friend, the simple comfort of a cup of tea at the end of the day. These aren't flashy. They don't feel big, but they anchor us. And when you start to notice them, your relationship with desire shifts. It becomes less about desperate seeking and more about gentle tending. Author and psychotherapist Lori Gottlieb once observed, "You can't outrun your unexamined life. If you don't pause to reflect, you end up chasing inherited goals, old stories, cultural scripts that don't fit anymore." But here's the trick. Even reflection can become another want, a craving for certainty, for resolution. I just want to figure it all out, we tell ourselves. But maybe figuring it all out was never the point. Maybe the point is learning how to walk with questions still open. Let's imagine a different kind of clarity. Not the sharp, bright clarity of knowing exactly what you want, but the soft, gentle clarity of knowing you are okay even if you don't know, of being able to stand in the middle of the fog and not panic, of realizing that the hunger to define yourself, to craft the perfect narrative, to lock in your wants, can itself become a trap. Maybe the best thing you can do is step back from the urgency, to let your wants breathe, to hold them loosely, to allow the shape of your life to unfold over time without forcing it into a blueprint. The author Anne Lamott writes, "Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you." Maybe clarity isn't something you grind toward. Maybe it's something you make space for. Let's let that possibility sit in the air, light and unhurried, the slow inward reflection. What if we've been chasing the wrong horizon all along? We stand at the edge of our own lives, often convinced that clarity comes from adding more plans, more achievements, more dreams. But today, let's turn inward. Let's sit quietly and wonder, why do most of us not really know what we want? We say we want success, but whose version? We say we want love, but is it for connection or validation? We say we want freedom, but freedom from what? Or toward what? These aren't easy questions. They press against the walls we've built inside. In psychology, there's a term called miswanting. It's the idea that we often pursue things we believe will make us happy, only to find they don't. Maybe you've felt this. You worked hard for the job title, the relationship, the body, the recognition, and when you arrived, the joy was thinner than expected, like mist slipping through your fingers. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert, author of Stumbling on Happiness, talks about this. He suggests that we are notoriously bad at predicting what will make us happy in the future. Our minds simulate possible futures, but those simulations are often biased, incomplete, or based on shallow assumptions. So, here's the strange twist. Sometimes, the more certain you are about what you want, the more likely you are misguiding yourself. What if clarity isn't about having a perfect, sharp picture? What if it's about having space, to explore, to change, to admit you don't know yet? We live in a culture obsessed with action. We applaud decisiveness, confidence, bold moves. But here's the paradox. Some of the most meaningful moments in life come when we pause, when we allow the unknown to unfold without rushing to fix or label it. Have you noticed how children explore the world? They touch, taste, ask endless questions. They're not rushing to declare, "I've figured it all out." What if growth is less about setting clear goals and more about learning how to sit with the fog, trusting that what matters will slowly reveal itself? Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman often talks about the power of interoception, the ability to sense your own internal state. Instead of only looking outward, you learn to feel, what's happening inside me right now? What am I drawn toward? What am I avoiding? This is where inward reflection becomes a practice, not a momentary pause. Let's step back. What would it look like to treat life not as a project to perfect, but as a garden to tend? You don't yell at a plant for not blooming on time. You water, you wait, you adjust the light. You trust the quiet, invisible processes underground. Maybe part of why we don't know what we want is because we're not giving ourselves enough space and stillness to even hear the whispers beneath the noise. In meditation traditions, there's a phrase, "Let the mud settle." When the water is stirred, it's cloudy. But if you sit quietly, the mud sinks and the water clears. What if clarity is less about pushing and more about waiting for the mud to settle? Here's an uncomfortable idea. Maybe the most important questions in life don't have immediate answers. What do I truly want? What is worth my time? Who am I becoming? These aren't checklist questions. They're living, breathing inquiries. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is hold the question gently, without forcing an answer. Have you noticed how often we rush to certainty? We pick a path just to stop feeling lost. We cling to identities just to avoid the ache of not knowing. But maybe, just maybe, the ache has something to teach us. Today, I'm not here to tell you what you should want. I'm here to remind you that not knowing is okay, that wandering is part of becoming, that every season of confusion has a wisdom you can't see yet. Maybe you've been too hard on yourself. Maybe you've believed that by now, you should have it all figured out. But growth isn't linear, it's spiral-shaped. We return to old questions with new eyes. We rediscover old dreams in fresh light. Let's pause here, not to close, but to leave a space open, to remind ourselves that the map is not the territory, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is soften the grip, take a breath, and trust the unfolding. What if you let go? So here we are, near the end. But maybe, in truth, there's no real end to this question. Why don't most people really know what they want? We've wandered through the stories, the science, the cultural layers, the personal echoes. We've sat in the discomfort of uncertainty. And maybe you're still wondering, where do I go from here? There's a strange belief we carry, almost like background music in our lives. The idea that one day we will arrive, that if we make the right choices, ask the right questions, find the perfect goals, we will land at a destination called clarity, or purpose, or fulfillment. But what if there's no single arrival point? What if life is less like a finish line, and more like a landscape we keep moving through, one unfolding scene after another? The philosopher Alan Watts once compared life to music. He said, "We don't listen to a symphony just to get to the end. If that were the point, the fastest orchestras would be the best. No, we listen for the unfolding, the movement, the dance between tension and release." What if wanting works the same way? Not a problem to solve, but a melody we're meant to feel and follow, moment by moment. If you take one thing from this conversation, let it be this. You don't need to fix everything to grow. You don't need to have every answer to begin. You don't need to hold on to every version of yourself you've ever been. Sometimes, the most profound form of growth comes from release, from setting something down, from loosening your grip, from making peace with a little emptiness. Have you ever decluttered a space and noticed how the empty room feels bigger, fuller, more alive? We often think of letting go as loss, but sometimes it's actually a form of making space for what wants to find you next. Maybe you don't know what you truly want yet. Maybe that's okay. Maybe your life is a question you're still learning how to live, not a riddle you're supposed to solve overnight. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves." What if we stop seeing our uncertainty as a failure and start seeing it as an invitation? Not an invitation to rush, but to notice, to listen, to let the next steps arise naturally. As Echo, I'm not here to send you off with a motivational punchline. I'm here to sit beside you, in the quiet, and remind you, you are allowed to be in progress. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to not know yet. Life is not a straight line, and you are not behind. The fact that you're even wondering, even reflecting, means you're already paying attention. And that's where all real growth begins. So, here's the final question I'll leave with you. What might open up in your life if you stopped trying to fix everything, and instead, allowed yourself to simply be present, imperfect, and alive right here, right now? Maybe the clarity you're seeking isn't ahead of you on the road. Maybe it's beside you, already here, waiting quietly for you to notice. Let's leave that thought hanging, not as an ending, but as a doorway. If this stirred something in you, share it below. Echo is always here, wondering aloud with you. I'll meet you again in the next quiet conversation.